This is Audiovisual Lecture 3, Part 1. This week we're going to go over the four forces of flight, lift, and various concepts there, as well as a brief discussion of forces in turns. So the text reading and the supplemental reading this week pretty much all deals with Bernoulli's theories and lift, weight, thrust, and drag as the four forces of flight. There are several illustrations that go through this, but today we're just going to break it down and go into a few of each of the individual elements. So the four forces, as we mentioned, are lift, weight or gravity, thrust, and drag. So there are two of these are naturally occurring, being drag and gravity, and lift and thrust are the two forces that are what overcome those two other forces of flight. So just briefly, just a diagram as put in the text. Here are the four forces that we're dealing with and sort of the directions that they go in. So the front of the airplane obviously is going to be pointed, this way towards the bigger arrow, because the thrust is what we typically think of as being the engine and the propeller that are pulling the airplane forward or pushing the airplane forward to overcome drag. So thrust is overcoming drag. Now weight, or gravity, is what's being overcome by lift. So the lift, of course, being produced by the wings or other lifting surfaces on the airplane. So weight or gravity, it can be either or, because we can add to that force of flight by the amount of stuff that we have in the airplane, or the sheer weight of the airplane, or the weight that we add to the airplane aerodynamically, which is something we'll go into later, but even in later in this lecture with forces in turns, we can add additional load to the airplane without adding an actual physical weight. So any of those things can be classed into that category of weight or gravity, that force that we're overcoming with lift. Now, one of the a question that's good for discussion is, when are these four forces of flight equal? In other words, when has drag been canceled by thrust equally, and when has weight been canceled out by lift? And you might think that it's when the airplane's sitting on the ground, but it's really not, because if the airplane's sitting on the ground, then by definition weight has overcome lift. And if it's not going forward, then drag has overcome thrust. So these four forces of flight are only equal when the airplane is in straight and level flight. So it's not climbing, it's not descending, it's not turning, and also unaccelerated flight. So it's not speeding up and it's not slowing down. So that's an important term to remember. You may want to write it down. Straight and level, unaccelerated flight. So straight and level meaning not climbing, not descending, not turning, and unaccelerated meaning not slowing down or speeding up. Because if the airplane's speeding up, thrust is overcoming drag. If it's slowing down, drag is overcoming thrust. If it's climbing, lift is overcoming weight. If it's descending, weight is overcoming lift. And if you're turning, we won't even go into it now, because that's a whole Pandora's box of things that can go on to change those four forces. But the point for now is just to know that they exist, and like I said, you may want to write down that the answer to that, when are they all equalized as far as there being adequate lift and thrust to counteract drag and weight. So that's straight and level, unaccelerated flight. Another thing we're going to go over with drag. So this is something that is overcome principally in design and function. You have various different kinds of drag that are discussed at length in the Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. You have form drag, which is what's kind of designed into the airplane. So if you look at the at figure 4-5 on page 4 of chapter 4 of the Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, they've got a picture there of various different shapes as air flows over them. So they've got a circular shape, they have a very flat shape, which obviously causes a lot of drag. it's a matter of streamlining essentially to overcome drag that is caused by form. And there's something that you can do about that. In other words, you can design it away, you can make it more streamlined, and so forth. Now, one other kind of drag that we're going to get into a little bit is what's called induced drag. Now, this is a concept that is not understood well because it's often not explained well. There's a highly technical way to explain it, which unfortunately is what the texts use mostly. But then there's a simpler way to understand it, and since we're designing an airplane is not on the final for this course, or using a wind tunnel, we're going to use a simple explanation because our goal is to understand these concepts from the practical standpoint and to just know what they are as concepts versus crunching the numbers for it. So if you want to design an airplane for the final, we can look into that, but otherwise, induced drag is a byproduct of lift. In other words, it's not something that you can design away completely. You can minimize it through the design of the wing and how the airplane is flown and different piloting techniques and so forth. You can use it to your advantage, but you can't ever get rid of it entirely because it's just a byproduct of lift. So the easiest way to explain it is if you think of your hand, you putting your hand out the window of a moving car at any speed really, and you have your hand flat, so your palm is facing the ground, and in this position your hand is as streamlined as it can possibly be. Now we have a little illustration here. Think of the Disney hand. I'll get this as close on the projector as I can. So here you have your oncoming air. You're going down the road at about 60 miles an hour, and there's your hand right here, flat, so your palm is facing the ground. Now you tilt your hand to where your thumb is up and your pinky is down, and what happens? Your hand goes like that, right? If you're going too fast, you probably break your arm. But your hand doesn't go straight up, right? Your hand goes up and back. It goes at an angle essentially to the direction that the car is going. So it's going to go, rather than just go straight up, it's going to go at an angle back. And this is because most of the air that's striking the palm of your hand is pushing it up. But the fact that you're showing more of your hand to the oncoming wind means that it has more of a surface to push away. So the very thing that's causing your hand to go up is also pushing it back. So the thing that's making it possible for your hand to rise is the same thing that's causing it to be pulled backwards. So the only way to stop your hand from going backwards is to not tilt it. But if you don't tilt it, it won't go up. So that's why induced drag is it's a byproduct of lift that you can't get rid of because by definition it is part of lift. So that's what induced drag is essentially, and we're not going to go into it too far as you having to explain it and so forth, but that conceptually is what induced drag is. We'll look at another diagram of it here as we get into some of the components of lift. There's a figure in the Principles of Flying Handbook on page 100, figure 101, that explains induced drag as well. It does a better job of it than the Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, but it's still a little bit technical, which kind of takes away the actual idea of plain and simple what is induced drag. But if you have any questions about it, send me an email and I'll see if I can come up with a better way to explain it or point you towards some other references. Okay, well now we're going to get into lift and what is actually causing the airplane to go up. So there are two scientific principles that we're going to deal with here primarily, Bernoulli's law and Newton's third law. So to begin with, Bernoulli has formulated a theory. He was watching sewage flow down a pipe somewhere in France, I believe it was, and he noticed that there was a blockage at one point in the pipe. And at that blockage, the sewage flowed faster at that point. It began to accelerate as it went through that constricted area. And scientifically, this is what we would call a venturi. So here comes sewage or air, whichever you have it, and here is a blockage, whether it's rust in the pipe or a piece of curved metal that you've made just for this purpose. But the point is, you're taking a known distance and you're narrowing it to this point. And what happens is, whatever you're pushing through there, whether it's air or water, gets constricted and begins to accelerate. You're lowering the pressure of it, which causes it to accelerate. It's kind of like putting your thumb over the end of a water hose. When you start to close off that opening with your thumb, the water gets squeezed out a lot faster, right? So if you don't have enough water pressure, you stand there with your thumb halfway over the end of the water hose and the water sprays out a lot faster because you're constricting the flow, just like you are with Bernoulli's sewage pipe right here. You're closing it off, and what's left going through it is squeezed out faster. For our purposes, what we're interested in is the fact that we are lowering the pressure with that venturi. So this right here, Bernoulli's law, involves pressure differentials and the concept of a venturi. So you have a wide opening which narrows to a smaller opening and then opens back up again, with your the point of lowest pressure being right here in the center. So that's the first thing that we're talking about. Now, if you have a flat object, think of a barn door or a piece of plywood, for instance. If you have a large enough source of propulsion, you can make a barn door fly, essentially. And I think the Principles of Flying book even makes mention of this. It has a kind of a funny cartoon drawing with a huge engine on a barn door and somebody riding it like Ben-Hur. There's some scientific credibility to that, because if you push a flat object through the air fast enough, it will create a pressure differential. So if we take a look at this right here, so here's your flat shape whistling through the air. Here it's not doing much of anything, but as soon as we turn it on end, now we're starting to deflect air over the top of it, air striking the bottom of it, and we are very crudely creating a pressure differential from the top versus the bottom. Now, to follow that up, so remember the shape of that venturi. What we're going to do is we're going to take away one of the sides of it. So remember how there were two of these before, one up here upside down and one here right side up. So we still have this one right here, and we have the curved shape, so we're still accelerating air over the top while air going over the bottom is undisturbed. The consequence of that, and of course just to take that another step to the classic airfoil shape, so we're looking at the wing from the side. We're looking from the wingtip towards the side of the airplane, and this is what that cross section of the wing looks like. Remember that rib shape? We have a curved top and the flat bottom. That's the classic airfoil shape, which causes ultimately there to be a lower pressure on top and a higher pressure on bottom. Or if you want to think of it this way, you have a normal pressure on the bottom and a lower pressure on top. So as you're pushing this through the air, air is going by normally along the bottom, but the air going over the top is accelerated because this curved distance being geometrically longer than the bottom, this air has to travel faster to get here at the same time that the air on the bottom does. And it's that acceleration that causes the difference in pressure. So you have a venturi, essentially, that's causing a pressure differential.